for our listeners, what are some of our other best tenant stories? You had to take a deep breath. They must be
our
good.
first foray into multifamily investing has been a trip. It has just been a trip. So this is an 8-unit that you and I, again, went on 50-50 over in Ontario, Oregon. So a new state, new regulations. This area has just been underbuilt for the last 40 years. There's not a whole lot of industry. However, there's a population that's moving there, partly because things got more expensive in Boise. And so there's
It's right over the border. I think it was a cold call, actually. I had talked to the owner, and he was in our data set because sometimes our data runs over the border. And he was definitely a distressed owner.
And
so go ahead.
When you approached me with this one, I don't know if we quite understood what the current state of the tenant population was over there or what they had going on. We have had everything from, we had to replace a roof because of a windstorm. And at that point, the first roofer we hired didn't cover up the roof, let a rainstorm happen. And then we had water damage into all of the upstairs apartments. When they were trying to fix it, the guy fell through the roof into the apartment with a tenant in there.
Just to paint that picture, right? You hire a roofer to come replace a roof. I think it was a 2 or 3 day job. They literally, they took all the shingles off and a lot of the sheathing. They literally left it exposed overnight, just open to the air, which I've never heard of before. I've never seen before. And of course it rained. And I remember talking to the roofer and he's like, well, there wasn't any rain in the forecast.
Yes.
And I'm just like, are you kidding me? What are you? So yeah, that was a full-on lawsuit then.
Because but wait, there's more.
Yeah, continue.
Because of the way this unit's constructed, there was AC units on the roof. So when the roof got replaced, they removed the AC units. They decided to put them on the neighbor's lot right next door rather than ours. And then the day before they got everything finished, they had a crane hired up. We got a call that morning saying, where are the AC units? Do you guys move them? And somebody had come in with like a mini backhoe and had stolen 3 AC units off of the lot next door because they weren't secured in any way.
Dude, I forgot about this. So guys, these aren't like the wall units that you plug in. These are like huge commercial units that you see like on the top of buildings that like heat and cool office spaces. They're massive. They have to weigh what? Like 1,500 pounds a ton?
Oh yeah, you're not taking them out of there with anything that's not a heavy machinery.
Yeah. So they take them off to replace the roof, and then somebody just like comes in with a backhoe and steals them all. What happens next?
So this is all part of what ends up being a nice lawsuit with that contractor, the roofing contractor. And this is right as winter's starting. And so now we don't have heating units in the units. So we end up having to buy space heaters and then pay for the electricity bills for the tenants that are still there for, it was like up to 14 weeks or something like that. Because it was during COVID and everything was back ordered. So we couldn't get an AC unit in any sooner. Eventually, and this is something that you've been really great about, not allowing these things just to go by the wayside. This was something where, because we found a lawyer who was willing to work with us, and because you persisted on going that route, we were able to end up coming up with a settlement with the contractor to compensate for the lost AC units, the damage that was incurred, the lost rent that we incurred because we couldn't put people in units with holes in the ceiling. And at the end of it, I think we ended up paying out of pocket for a new roof and 3 new AC units, which would have retailed for somewhere around $55,000-$60,000 for right around $27,000. All out of pocket.
That was going to be my next question. These things cost how much a piece?
They were about just over $10,000.
Okay, and then the roof was how much?
It was just shy of 20 to put on.
Yeah, so we're talking plus missed rent.
Yep.
Plus we got a few months, multiple months of missed rent. You're talking like a 70 to 80 grand thing when it's all said and done in damages. This will be a podcast for a different day, probably multiple podcasts, because I got a lot of good information to share about my experience with lawsuits and contractors and some stuff the audience can really take and learn from. I've seen a lot just in my short time already and been a part of, had to sue a lot of people that won't do the right thing, and neither here nor there. But I think, to your point, there's a temptation with most people when faced with that kind of confrontation. It stresses them out too much. And a lawsuit is super stressful and can be very emotionally draining. When there's a lot of money at stake, the decision makes it a little easier, right? Because you can't just like take that big of a loss. We have some reserves, but we're not working with monopoly money, right? I think it's important, if you're in the right and you have proof, stand your ground. If there's anything that I've learned about working with attorneys and contractors, they have no problem lying about anything. It's pretty crazy what attorneys will write up in letters and say about you and lie about you. And that was the case here. Do you remember any of that back and forth about what they said?
It was multiple months of volleying letters back and forth, of nasty calls from the contractor who owned it, saying that we were basically trying to scam him out of money, saying that we were trying to take advantage of the situation, that we had probably stolen those AC units ourselves. And all of that was just a bunch of finger pointing. It comes back to, he didn't have enough oversight of his construction crews, and it would have been something him as the owner would have never done himself. Yet when you hire folks out, you're responsible being the head of an organization and being a company. And that is something that eventually we ended up working out because he took ownership of it.
So we settled, and then we were able to get the roof for free, basically. And then we had to file insurance on the lost 3 units, which was granted. So we ended up getting basically a free roof and then 3 brand new commercial heating and cooling units for what, a third of the price? You had to come out of pocket a little bit. But man, it took a toll. That was like 8 months of our life where we were super stressed and frantic about what's going to happen. And of course, just like we talked about with that first single family property, that could have been a moment where we were like, screw real estate. This is not worth it. This is our first big is relative. It was 8 units, but this is our first larger than 4 unit property. And what's happening in the first year? This is ridiculous, right? But now, how much does that cash flow on a monthly basis?
Depending on the month and expenses, it's bringing in, after all expenses, management, the current mortgage on it, somewhere between $4,500 and $6,500 a month.
And we've owned that, what, 2 years?
2.5 at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, January 2021 or February 2021.
So if you're cash flowing $6,000 a month, you can withstand a lot of bullshit. We got some other stories with that property. There's one or two especially that are worth telling during the remodel of the units.
Yeah, so I was going to say, for context on this, so distressed property, your landlord who does not take care of it at all. He'd had people in there who, I don't know if it would qualify for housing standards because of the quality of what was in there. Like, we found mold in almost every single bathroom, every single unit of the 8.
Cockroaches.
Oh my gosh, completely cockroach infested. And every single unit had to be completely gutted down to the floorboards. Sometimes those were taken out. All the kitchen cabinets, all the cupboards where you'd have a lot of mouse poo behind, a lot of droppings back there too. And so they had to do extermination of that, of roaches. And over the period of 2 years, eventually we got them all turned over. But in the meantime, there was one, I think it was like one of the first or second units. It was one of the first units. We were looking there and they're like, there's this weird spot in the floor that doesn't match anything else. It looks like somebody cut a hole through the floor into the crawl space.
Like a trap door.
Like a trap
right?
door.
Like a dungeon into the wood floor, right? Like a rectangle cut out. Yeah.
Yep. A hardwood floor cut it through the baseboard down into the crawl space. And they pulled it up and they looked down there, and we just got a call from our property management company saying, we're not sure what's down there, but there's a bunch of stuffed animals and a lump underneath a blanket. And we're not really sure what to do with it, so we called the cops.
Dude, do you remember getting those? First of all, obviously some drugs were involved. Drug usage was involved there, right? Like somebody had literally taken a bandsaw, dug a trap door through their wood floor. Like this wasn't like a handle or access to a crawl space. No. They literally dug a hole through the floor and put stuffed animals and stuff down there. And I remember getting the pictures in the email from the police of like a scene out of a horror film, like little Care Bears and like in dim lighting, like down there in the dirt in the crawl space, and like then these mounds. I thought it would be a funny prank on Cory. I had this recorded, but I deleted it because I felt so bad after doing it. But I I got the call first from the cops of like, hey, we went and checked it out. We dug up the mounds and they were cat bones. And so someone had like buried their cats down there. And I was like, oh my God. Because obviously when there's mounds and like animals and stuff, you think, okay, there could be something worse going on here. You assume the worst. And so I thought it'd be a fun idea. I call Cory and I'm like, hey, dude, you're never going to guess what they found down there. And you were like, oh my God, what? And I could hear you on the other side. And dude, I was trying so hard not to laugh, but I was just like, man, they found some dead babies down there, man. And you go, what? And then I just start busting out laughing. And I'm like, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I can't believe I went to that like length to prank you, but
either.
You're just thinking the whole time, what an asshole. Like for that moment, you're like, we've got what at our property now? After the roof, after the lawsuit, after the air conditioning.
Yeah. No.
Oh my gosh.
And just to add to that story, you didn't crack up laughing right away. There was a very long, awkward pause. You were able to hold your breath as I started to try to like game plan. What do we do next? Who do we need to call? I think we need to get a lawyer involved. And then you cracked up laughing. Yeah,
dude, it was one of those jokes. You know, like, have you ever like scared your siblings or your wife like hiding around a corner or something?
Oh yeah,
yeah, all the time. Have you ever done it like so bad where they like jump and like slip and fall, or like you feel bad? It was so good that it was like past the point of being funny. That's how I felt when I did that to you. And so then after that, I was like, I can't do anything like that for a long time. I felt so bad.
Now we can laugh about it.
Yeah. The last thing closing out that property, when we were rehabbing one of the units, they also found something behind the drywall of one of the units. What did they find?
Yeah. So I was just talking to the contractor the other day and asked him if this was the worst situation he'd ever seen. He said, yep, that's still the worst. And he's the same one.
How old is he?
He's in his 50s. He's the same one who found the stuffed animals in the mountains downstairs too. And he was renovating the bathroom, and right behind where the door swung open, the door handle had poked a hole in the wall. And he's looked his head and he found something in there. So he started like pulling it out and then pulling it out. And over time, the prior tenant had completely stuffed the cavity in this wall with used tampons and toilet paper.
Oh.
And so he rips out the wall and sends me a photo of it congealed together as basically insulation in between these between the frame.
How many are we talking?
I mean, it was a 2-foot high block in between 18-inch studs.
That's a lot of menstrual cycles.
High enough that he could start to see it through the hole. That's the only reason he even knew it was there. Otherwise, it'd still be festering in the wall.
Wow. Okay. So basically, through that sequence of events and everything we've talked about up to this point, everybody is scared to death to get into real estate by now. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about we literally have had we've had cat bones, we've had a death, we've had different bodily fluids in multiple locations on properties. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong, and this is just like what humans cause. This isn't even potentially what could happen, through hailstorms or wind or anything like that. Like there's an actual cost to this stuff.
Yeah, but to that point, we had property managers the whole time through both of these things, and so the daily communication we didn't have to be a part of So in that sense, it saved us a lot of, I mean, it would have been way worse if we had to handle all these shenanigans, but
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. And yet it was manageable because there was a team. And the team had been through some of the stuff, not all of it yet, and knew how to handle it. They knew how to handle when we got that 8 unit. And in the first couple of months, there was family members there who were feuding. There were family members who were bringing over guns, and they had some drugs on the location, and they were able to get them evicted without having to pay them to leave because they violated the tenant laws. So that kind of stuff of having a team that's in place made all the difference on that unit. Even through everything else that went wrong, having the right people in place who knew what to do was the biggest difference in that being successful today versus it being a complete disaster.
Yeah, in addition to that with all the bad stuff that comes with C, it's not really a D class, but I mean, we're making it sound terrible. It's not really a D class property, but it's definitely a C class property. Housing assistance, Section 8. Our property manager, although a little bit pricier than we'd like, is an expert at getting housing assistance. And that's guaranteed rent. So even though it's in Oregon, we don't want to be landlords in blue states because of tenant landlord laws. They're very tenant favorable. Having that guaranteed rent from the housing assistance, there's like 3 or 4 different ones of them. There's Section 8, there's Oregon housing assistance, there's like county housing assistance. There's all kinds of programs that we can get guaranteed rent from. So a lot of people shy away from that, but honestly, it can be very, very lucrative getting that guaranteed rent. And then they're guaranteed increases too on top of that.
That has definitely saved our bacon while some of that other stuff was going wrong and we had some tenants not paying. Having that reliable income come in kept everything afloat.
Yeah, absolutely. And now there's even situations where we're getting above market rent because of the housing assistance, because the housing assistance allows X% increase per year, and it's pretty high. So obviously you got to deal with the rent control in Oregon, which I believe is you can't raise it more than 9% a year, right? But if the housing assistance is paying for 3 to 5% a year, and you're doing that every year, you're going to be able to keep up with whatever rents are. So, or even higher.
Yeah, in Oregon, it's a benchmark based on inflation. And so this last year, we actually had, I think the biggest in history, it was like 13 or 14% potential rent increase. And then the year prior, it was 9. And so we'll see what it's like in the future. Yet, if you have a property management company that's on top of it, or you are yourself, as long as you're maxing that out every year, you're probably going to do fine. Like you're not going to get too far behind over time. And that's what helped in this situation. We started out, most of the rents in that unit were anywhere between $500 and $700. And now after renovation, because we got new tenants in, we put more into the property. I think our lowest rent, we still have one unit at $870. And then everything else is $1,100 to $1,400 right now. So almost double what we were getting before.
Yeah, that's big time. That's big time. Just to be clear, though, if you're going to deal with Section 8 tenants or housing assistant tenants, I would not self-manage those in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I'm also against that for single families and multifamilies. There's ways to do it if you're experienced, but I'm talking about for your new person to real estate, do not even try doing that yourself. There's also some legalities that you got to be careful about of who qualifies, who doesn't, can't discriminate against certain tenants. So just be careful about that stuff.